Point to any time in history and you will find countless instances of violence, from medieval torture tactics to modern tragedies, with numerous takes on why they happened and how they should be responded to. A theme throughout plenty of arguments which don't root out violence as an option is that such action is among the last measures to be taken, a retaliatory maneuver. The questions are if it's worth the price or not, given that it typically sparks a series of retaliation. And what are the causes of violence in the first place? There are many answers, but among them are revenge, masculinity, and mental health. For a quick biological setup, with regard to interspecies killing, our great ape ancestry sits at a lethal violence rate of 2%, compared to a 0.3% seen in other mammals. Which makes sense when considering that higher group living in territoriality means competition over resources. These resources could be food, living space, or mates. Basically, higher sociality leads to more instances of violence. And with humans, this base reason, resources, can largely be pointed to. But given our complexities, there's more specific things to be explored. Specific things with more nuance. When it comes to the history of violence, a great summation can be found in the Code of Hammurabi, Babylonian scripture dating back to 1755 to 1750 BCE, which, in part, states, "An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." An exemplification of conflict arising from such philosophy can be found in the common rebuttal for this quote. "An eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind." Those arguing the latter may point to World War I. A large cause for the escalation had been the several agreements between different countries to back each other up when faced with foreign threats. It had been a means of deterrence, but when put into practice, it built up into a large-scale war. Historians point to several causes for what had been the catalyst of this domino effect, but the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand is unmistakably the key event. He'd been killed in Sarajevo, which caused Austria-Hungary to declare war on Serbia, with the assassin being a young member of the Black Hand who was motivated by revenge. In other words, the First World War was the consequence of fighting fire with fire. Had that young member not resorted to violence, Austria-Hungary might have not declared war on Serbia, preventing the series of events which unfolded. Plus, given that World War II was a consequence of Germany losing the First War, it too might have been avoided by the use of pacifism. Conversely, when arguing for violent retaliation, they point to the enslaved peoples of Haiti, who fought back and won their freedom. Started in 1791 and further encouraged by the French Revolution 2 years prior, the Haitian Revolution consisted of 4 groups. The white slave owners, who benefited the most, the black slave owners, who were underprivileged in certain ways, the slaves, who were underneath all of them, and the escapees, who were previously slaves, who were sectioned off to a certain part of the island. A formerly enslaved military leader, Toussaint Louverture, managed to take over the then called Santo Domingo until Napoleon's brother-in-law, Charles Leclerc, sorry, don't speak French guys, was sent to reclaim the land. This leading to an armistice which France broke to capture Louverture, in which he died in prison. According to the same source, the fight continued as Louverture's lieutenants pressed on, in which they eventually succeeded in forcing off the French during the battles of Vertières. The French would have been gone from the island as of 1809. There is more nuance, but this brief summary showcases how violent revolt was necessary for the freedom of slaves in Haiti. Had they done nothing, not only would they have been enslaved for a much longer period of time, prolonging suffering for themselves and those they love, but they wouldn't have been able to establish their own country either. Moving on to masculinity, violence has long been upheld by men as a symbol of their worth across several cultures. Take Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, for example, a story in which the main character, Okonkwo, is a successful wrestler and warrior in his tribe who struggles to deal with the shift in culture which occurs as colonizers take over. There are several themes in the book, with one of them being the toxicity and hypermasculinity. Okonkwo is vehemently against men displaying anything deemed effeminate, a value he enforces on his son Nwoye, such as punishing his crime, who initially looks up to him but ends up being pushed away as things are taken to an extreme. The situation which caused Nwoye to be distant had been the killing of Ikemefuna, a boy who grew close to Nwoye, that Okonkwo viewed as another son. As part of tradition, he was to be sacrificed, but until the time came, Okonkwo was to watch over him, which made plenty of time for him to become part of the family. When Ikemefuna was to be walked away and murdered, The village elder discouraged Okonkwo from going, as they understood the connection he formed with the boy. But out of fear of being seen as weak, something he worried would put his masculinity in jeopardy, he took part in the journey, and even dealt the killing blow. On returning home, Okonkwo couldn't even bring himself to eat, yet he kept telling himself to get over it. Although a more severe case, it displays how masculinity upholds violence. Being aggressive is seen as manly, even if it's to the detriment of those around you and yourself, while emotions are forced to be bottled up and hidden away, which leads to more aggression. Now, whether said issues stem from nature or nurture, violence often comes from mental illness, specifically among those showing callous and unemotional traits. Often, comorbidities are present in more serious crimes like murder, like how conditions such as PTSD may trigger aggressive acts. You can point at most serial killers to see how this comes about, with a majority having multiple symptoms. In particular, antisocial personality disorder, characterized in part by a lack of empathy and increased impulsivity, is seen in many killers. Not that I mean to say that all people with ASPD will become one. So, given a worst-case scenario, abuse in one's household could lead toward the individual becoming more violent, in part from learning the behavior and having their psyche messed up from it. Regarding the first cause of violence discussed, I hold the view that revenge is not often worth it. It's not good in petty cases, like getting back at your sibling for breaking an item you own, and it's especially destructive in serious situations. But as exemplified with the second situation, that's not to say it shouldn't be ruled out, just that it should be only saved for intentional and unjust treatment. Usually only once other options have been exhausted or said treatment is violent. In any other case, more peaceful solutions tend to lead to better outcomes. When it comes to toxic masculinity, however, the answer is less simple. Typically, those who most value their masculinity would view any attempt at criticism over it as an attack. This makes it harder to reach those who need the help, so it's best to keep focusing on creating environments where people can simply be themselves. Modern America feels as though it's been on the right track with this, being accepting of emotions and less forceful with enforcing stereotypes, but there are constantly resurges of traditional values which stunt or revert progress. There's no solution for this tug-of-war between traditionalism and progressivism, except to keep on pulling. Fear and aversion to change are core parts of what keeps masculinity in its more dangerous state. But time keeps on moving and comfort tends to eventually win out over fear. There's far more to be said about what factors keep traditionalism upheld, such as misinformation and tribal mentalities, but for the sake of simplicity, I'll leave it at that for now. Although I might touch on it later. It's an interesting topic. In summary, there are a plethora of causes for violence, but of the most notable to me, I chose revenge, masculinity, and mental health. They all have some sort of overlap, given how masculinity values violence, and so men are more likely to go for revenge, should they be wronged, which is bad for the mental health of everyone, and negative mental health leads to more wrongdoing. Violence is cyclical in nature, and just needs a catalyst, like some senseless injustice, to kick off. Well, that's all I have to say on that. Thanks for stopping by, taking a dip. I said that weirdly. Thanks for stopping by and taking a dip. See you next time.